Peter Baker joins me now, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times and an MS Now contributor. Also reporting from the White House, Jackie Alemany, co-host of MS Now's The Weekend. Peter, as you put it, kind of the heart of this argument is whether Donald Trump, and not just about the Pope, but the war and so many other things, whether he's crazy like a fox or just plain crazy, psychosis versus strategy in the things that he says and does. What are the behaviors fueling this debate?
Yeah, I think you're right to point out the attack on the Pope. I think that shocked a lot of people. I think the tweet last week or the post last week threatening to wipe out Iran as a civilization certainly sparked a lot of concern. And that's where you heard it a lot, particularly on the right, from people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Alex Jones, Candace Owens, people who in the past at least have been part of the MAGA movement. And I think that, you know, the Easter post where he was very profane and talking about destroying Iran. And I think it's also just like everyday, appearances. He wanders off into, an 8-minute digression about snakes in Peru, or he confuses where his father was born, or he suggests that the new president of Iran is more reasonable than the last president of Iran, even though there isn't a new president of Iran. It's still the same president of Iran. Talks about, ending the war between Cambodia and Azerbaijan, which are, of course, 4,000 miles away, probably means Armenia. And I think that, some of this has been something we've seen with him going back a decade. Certainly, Democrats have been accusing him of being unstable for a decade. But it's fascinating to hear that concern now voiced in new quarters that haven't been as prominent in that regard.
And of course, Peter, questions have been raised a lot in the past about Nixon, right? About Reagan, of course, about Joe Biden. But is this different to the extent, at least in part, because we are at a war that he decided to go into where he's making conflicting and confusing statements, and American military lives are at risk?
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between Joe Biden, who was clearly aging in front of our eyes. He was slowing down physically. He was slowing down, cognitively. I think people would agree. He was, lost his train of thought from time to time, confused names and so forth. But he wasn't acting in the same volatile way. That's the issue here. I think that people are talking about with President Trump is not that he is necessarily slower physically, but is he so volatile, so erratic that it's dangerous for the country? And you're right. At the time of war is when that becomes most important. If he lashes out at political figures, in an intemperate post, that's one thing. But talking about wiping out a civilization, which would be, of course, a war crime, not to say the least, is another thing. And now what his defenders would say, the White House would say, OK, this is just strategy, guys. You're getting way too worked up. We know he likes to be provocative. He likes to get people's attention. He likes to say things that get people stirred up. But it's really all strategy. It's Nixon's madman theory. You tell them that you're crazy, therefore they will give you a better bargain because they don't want to take a chance. And some people said, look, he got the ceasefire because he threatened to wipe out Iran. But there are some who say, look, that's just taking it too far.
Well, there was, Jackie, the response from the Pope after Trump threatened to wipe out a civilization, and that kind of fueled this escalating duel between them. And in a new interview, Trump refused to back down, including back down from his widely questioned explanation for that AI-generated meme depicting him as a Christ-like figure. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, Chris, in an interview with CBS News' Norah O'Donnell, she's the reporter who actually conducted the interview with the Pope that aired on 60 Minutes on Sunday evening. He admitted that he was surprised by the backlash that he received from the religious right and from influential conservative religious figures who are normally MAGA adherents and very reticent in general to criticize the president. But this did mark a very rare retreat for the president to altogether delete the post. The last time something like this happened was in February. That was at least during the president's second term, when he retweeted a picture, a racist image of President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, and then blamed it on a staffer gone rogue. But last night, even after deleting this tweet, decided to double down on his comments and his criticisms of the Pope. I'm going to read you some quotes here from that interview. But Trump said that he's wrong on the issues. I don't think he should be getting into politics. I think he probably learned that from this. I pulled that as a picture of me being a doctor and fixing. This is, again, the president reiterating this response that he's given for why he posted this picture to begin with. You had the Red Cross right there. You had, medical people surrounding me. And I was like the doctor, as a little fun playing the doctor and making people better. Now, whether or not people decided to believe this, the president continued to criticize the Catholic Church, which was the reason for the backlash to begin with. He also went on to say that he had done more for the Catholic Church than any other president in the last 100 years. And he said that during COVID, he gave the church billions of dollars, and that was for education, and that it's not the right way to treat somebody who has been so good to them.
So, Peter, I want to play a little bit of what we've heard in reaction to all of this from some members of Congress.
The president's behavior over the last several hours and days is delusional. To post a figure of himself dressed as Jesus Christ, that suggests that he wants people to think he's God. This is a serious issue, whether he has the capacity to continue to lead.
What is going on?
You'd have to ask a psychiatrist. It isn't even worthy of a conversation. It's really worthy of a diagnosis.
The White House denies any suggestion of mental decline, as you know, Peter, telling you that the president is, quote, sharp and keeping his opponents on edge. But then there was the Pope again warning of the, without mentioning Donald Trump by name, delusion of omnipotence that surrounds us and is becoming increasingly unpredictable and aggressive. So lots of questions being raised, lots of criticisms out there. But does it lead to anything, Peter?
Well, look, you're hearing Democrats talk about the 25th Amendment, and even now some of these figures on the right, we talked about Marjorie Taylor Greene and some of the others as well are talking about that. The 25th Amendment, of course, people probably remember, is the one that's meant to provide for removing a president because of disability. It really wasn't meant for this kind of a circumstance. It's not such an easily achieved thing. It requires a majority of the cabinet plus the vice president to declare that the president is not able to discharge his duties. And even then, by the way, the president would have the ability to appeal that to Congress, and Congress would then have to decide by 2/3 vote that the vice president and the cabinet are wrong. So it's not really a mechanism that is plausible here. It's just a way of people making a political point, I think, because there is not really a way to address a situation if the president is seen to be erratic and volatile. This is something that a lot of people say, look, he's always been this way. People are making too much out of this. But, you rightly point out, this is a time of war and there are consequences that go beyond, people's feathers being ruffled.